the silent theaters of the corporate world, the most dangerous betrayals are not announced with a drumroll, but with a quiet smile. They unfold in hushed conversations by the water cooler, in emails sent after hours, and in the hollow echo of a promise broken. It is a world where ambition wears the mask of friendship, and loyalty is a commodity traded for the next rung on the ladder. And for Ilara Vance, the silence of that particular Tuesday afternoon was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The air in the conference room was thick, with forced enthusiasm and the faint smell of lukewarm coffee. It was the quarterly town hall, an event that usually blended into the background of her busy schedule, but today was different. Today, her future was on the agenda. Marcus Thorne, her department head, stood at the podium, a portrait of practiced charisma in a suit that cost more than her first car. He spoke of growth, of synergy, of the incredible milestones they had achieved. Ilara listened, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. Every milestone he mentioned was built on a foundation of her data, her late nights, her unwavering dedication. For a year, Marcus had dangled the promotion to senior strategist in front of her, a prize for her relentless work on the critical Nexus project. It was hers. She had earned it. Marcus paused, a theatrical glint in his eye. And now, it gives me immense pleasure to recognize someone whose strategic vision has been instrumental to our success. This individual will be leading our strategy team into the next quarter. Please join me in congratulating our new senior strategist. Ilara held her breath, a small, hopeful smile ready to form on her lips. The name he called was not hers, Liam Hayes. The applause erupted, a wave of polite, corporate noise that felt like a physical blow. It washed over Ilara, pushing the air from her lungs. She saw Liam, her best friend, her confidant, the person she had mentored and shared every single idea with, rise to his feet. His face was flushed, a mixture of pride and something else, something that looked like shame. Her gaze shifted to Marcus, who caught her eye for a fraction of a second. He gave her a look that was not of malice, but of something far worse, pity. It was a dismissive, patronizing glance that said, "You see? I told you. You were never meant for this." In that instant, the applause faded into a dull, distant roar. The world narrowed to the smug smile on her manager's face and the averted eyes of her best friend. There was no anger, not yet. There was only a sudden, chilling void, a profound emptiness where trust and certainty used to be. The foundation of her world hadn't just cracked. It had disintegrated into dust. To understand the depth of the wound, you must first understand the trust that was broken. You must walk the pristine, soulless halls of Sterling Cross Financial and find your way to a small, unassuming cubicle in the corner of the 37th floor. This was Ilara Vance's domain. It was a space of quiet order in a universe of loud chaos. While others decorated their desks with pictures of family vacations and motivational posters, Ilara's space was a testament to her mind. A single, healthy succulent, 3 perfectly sharpened pencils, and monitors that glowed with intricate lines of code and shimmering data constellations. To the untrained eye, it was just noise, but to Ilara, it was a language. She was a translator of numbers, a storyteller whose characters were market trends and consumer behavior. She could look at a spreadsheet and see a narrative of hope or greed or impending failure. She wasn't just an analyst, she was the company's oracle, whether they knew it or not. She carried herself with a quiet efficiency that was often mistaken for shyness. In a company that valued performative confidence, Ilara believed in the simple, unshakable power of being correct. Her work spoke for itself, a clear, resonant voice in a cacophony of corporate jargon. She came from a world far removed from the Ivy League pedigree of her colleagues, a place where success was measured by the integrity of your work, not the brand of your suit. This belief was her compass and her shield. She was convinced that in the end, competence would always win. It had to. This unwavering faith in meritocracy was her greatest strength and her most tragic flaw. Presiding over this small kingdom of data was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a man sculpted from corporate ambition. His suits were sharp, his handshake was firm, and his smile was a carefully calibrated weapon. He moved through the office not like a manager, but like a politician canvassing for votes. He never remembered the details of a project, but he always remembered the name of a vice president's dog. He was a master of delegation, particularly of blame. His own genius lay in identifying the true talent in his team, like Alara, and positioning himself as the conductor of their symphony. He would stand before the board, presenting her meticulous research and brilliant strategies as if they were his own casual epiphanies. His interactions with Alara were a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He would lean against her cubicle, exuding an air of conspiratorial intimacy. "Alara," he'd begin, his voice a low, encouraging rumble. "That report on the quarterly projections. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. You have a gift for seeing what others miss." He would never ask about her methodology or the challenges she overcame. He wasn't interested. His praise was a transaction. It was the currency he used to buy her continued, uncredited labor. And then, he would always deliver the hook. "This is senior strategist level work, you know that," he would muse, looking off into the distance as if picturing her in a corner office. "Just keep this engine running. Your time is coming. I'm making sure of it." He made her feel seen, valued, and on the cusp of a great breakthrough, all while keeping her exactly where he needed her, invisible but essential. In this high-stakes, low-sincerity environment, Alara had one anchor, Liam Hayes. If Alara was the architect of the team's success, Liam was the charming publicist. He had a quick laugh, an easy smile, and an innate ability to make everyone feel like they were his closest friend. He and Alara were an unlikely pair. She was the quiet engine. He was the polished exterior. Their friendship was forged in the trenches of tight deadlines and Marcus's unreasonable demands. They had a ritual. Every morning, he would bring her a coffee, exactly how she liked it, and she would spend 10 minutes untangling the mess he'd made of his latest assignment. They were the office's unspoken duo, often referred to as a work marriage. Alara saw his struggles with the complex data and felt a protective instinct. She thought his charm was a mask for insecurity, and she was happy to be his support system. She'd patiently walk him through her analysis, simplifying the intricate patterns into digestible talking points he could use in meetings. "Think of it like this," she'd say, sketching a diagram on a whiteboard. He would watch, nodding with a look of profound gratitude. "Alara, you're a lifesaver," he would say, his voice full of genuine admiration. "I swear, my brain just doesn't work like yours. When you get that promotion, you better take me with you." She would just smile, warmed by the camaraderie. She believed they were a team, fighting the good fight against the office politicians. She saw him not as a competitor, but as her partner. She shared her discoveries, her theories, her groundbreaking ideas with him freely, believing that his success was intertwined with hers. She gave him the finished blueprints, trusting him to help her lay the bricks. She never imagined he was planning to build the house for himself and lock her outside. The 37th floor at Stirling Cross was a microcosm of a cutthroat world. It was a place where alliances were temporary and favors were investments. Marcus had cultivated a court of jesters, a small group of employees who mirrored his style. They were loud in meetings, quick to agree with him, and proficient in the art of appearing busy. Alara and Liam, by contrast, saw themselves as the rebellion. They were the substance against the style, the merit against the mirth. This shared sense of being outsiders, of being the only two people who truly got it, was the glue that held their friendship together. It was a powerful illusion. Alara felt safe in their small bubble of two, never realizing that the greatest threat wasn't from the obvious phonies in Marcus's inner circle, but from the one person sitting right beside her. The calm before the storm is often the most beautiful part of the day, a time of serene ignorance before the sky turns dark and the world is torn apart. For Alara, this period was a year long, filled with the quiet satisfaction of good work and the comforting warmth of a trusted friend, a blissful peace that made the eventual betrayal not just a shock, but an uta devastation. Every great corporate drama has a turning point, a single event upon which all fortunes rise and fall. At Stirling Cross Financial, that event was called the Nexus Project. It wasn't born in a boardroom or conceived during a high-powered executive retreat. It was born in the quiet solitude of Alara Vance's cubicle, long after the cleaning crews had emptied the trash bins and the city had become a tapestry of distant lights. The company was facing a slow, creeping obsolescence. Their market share was eroding, nibbled away by smaller, more agile startups who spoke a digital language the old giant couldn't comprehend. The mood on the 37th floor was one of quiet panic, of executives speaking in hushed, worried tones. They saw a problem that needed to be managed. Alara, alone with her data streams, saw a solution that needed to be built. For weeks, she had been tracing a ghost in the machine, a faint, recurring pattern across a dozen unrelated datasets. It was a whisper of a new consumer demographic, a shadow of an untapped market hiding in plain sight. While her colleagues were busy repackaging old strategies, Alara was following this digital breadcrumb trail. It was a grueling, obsessive pursuit. She lived on coffee and protein bars, her sleep schedule governed not by the clock, but by the tantalizing promise of a breakthrough. And then, one rainy Thursday night, it happened. The disparate threads connected. The ghost in the machine took form, revealing not just a market, but an entire ecosystem waiting to be unlocked. She named it Nexus, for it was the point where all the company's dying branches could connect to a new, vibrant root system. It wasn't just a plan, it was a resurrection. The next morning, armed with a 70-page prospectus she'd built through the night, she requested a meeting with Marcus. She laid it all out on his polished mahogany desk, the data, the projections, the multi-phase implementation strategy. Marcus listened, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't understand the complex algorithms or the predictive modeling, but he understood power. He recognized the scent of a career-defining victory. He picked up the prospectus, feeling the weight of it in his hands. He didn't see the hours of her life poured into its pages. He saw a stepping stone. "Ilara," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This is it. This is the one." He stood up and began to pace, his initial surprise transforming into a performance of executive vision. "We'll need to package this right. It needs a strong, confident voice to sell it upstairs." He stopped and looked at her, a paternal smile spreading across his face. "This is your baby. I want you to lead it, but you'll need support. Someone to handle the communications, the politics. Someone like Liam." He then leaned against his desk, his tone becoming serious. "I'm going to be blunt, Alara. The senior strategist position is opening up at the end of the quarter. Officially, I have to interview candidates, but unofficially," he tapped her prospectus, "this is the only interview that matters. The success of Nexus is your audition, your final exam, and your coronation, all in one. Don't mess it up." The promise was no longer a vague insinuation. It was a contract, sealed with a handshake. Ilara walked out of his office feeling not manipulated, but anointed. She finally had her chance to prove that her work, her real work, was the most powerful force in the company. The weeks that followed were a blur of relentless effort. Alara descended into the project completely. Her cubicle transformed into the Nexus Command Center, its walls covered in whiteboards filled with complex flowcharts and handwritten equations. She became a ghost in her own life. Friends would text, asking if she was okay. The messages would go unanswered for days. Her world shrank to the size of her dual monitors, a universe of pure, unadulterated work. She was the architect of a new world, sketching out every beam, every support, every intricate detail. It was exhausting, isolating, and the most fulfilling work she had ever done. And through it all, Liam was there. He was her shadow, her confidant, her echo. He'd pull a chair up to her desk, watching her code, and he'd say, "I'm in awe, Alara. It's like you're playing a piano, and the music is pure profit." He never offered a strategic thought or challenged an assumption, but his presence was a comforting constant. He became her sounding board. She would spend hours explaining her latest breakthrough to him, simplifying the complex so he could understand. She thought she was building a shared understanding, creating a partner who could champion their work. She didn't realize she was conducting a masterclass, teaching him how to perfectly replicate her ideas, how to speak her language. He would rephrase her concepts back to her, and in his charming, confident voice, they sounded polished, simplified, more accessible. "You're the genius, Ilara," he'd say. "I'm just the guy who can translate it for the mortals." She emailed him everything: the raw data files, the executive summary drafts, the presentation decks. She wanted him to be as invested as she was. One evening, as she finalized the cornerstone of her presentation, a single, elegant slide that visualized the entire Nexus strategy, Liam peered over her shoulder. "My God, Ilara," he breathed. "That one image, that's the whole pitch. That's the $1,000,000 slide." She smiled, proud of her creation, happy to share the moment with her friend. She uploaded the final presentation to the shared drive, naming it Nexus, Final, Ilara, Liam. She saw their names linked together as a testament to their partnership. The night before the big pre-briefing with Marcus, they were the last two people in the office. The final report, thick and substantial, sat between them on the desk. The city twinkled below, a silent audience to their private victory. Ilara felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for the work, but for the journey. She felt she had found a true partner in the corporate wilderness. Liam put a hand on her shoulder, his expression one of deep sincerity. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Against all odds, we actually did it." Ilara leaned into the friendly gesture, a wave of exhaustion and relief washing over her. The word we hung in the air, a perfect, beautiful lie. In her mind, it meant a team, a friendship, a shared victory. In his, it was the final act of appropriation, the moment the echo convinced itself that it had been the voice all along. The day of the unveiling arrived cloaked in a deceptive stillness. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. In the main boardroom, on the 50th floor, a sterile sanctuary of glass and steel reserved for the company's most powerful decision-makers. The air in this room was different, thinner, charged with the silent pressure of immense wealth and influence. Ilara arrived early, taking a seat in the front row. She was a bundle of nervous energy, but it was the thrilling, electric nervousness of an artist before her gallery opening. Her laptop was open, files minimized, ready to deploy the raw data behind any of Marcus's talking points. She felt a deep, possessive pride. The Nexus project was more than a file on a server. It was a part of her. Today, she would watch it come to life. Marcus and Liam walked in together, both dressed in impeccably tailored navy suits, a uniform of corporate ambition. Liam gave her a quick, tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach his eyes before taking his seat beside Marcus at the head of the table. Ilara felt a momentary pang of unease at his distance, but brushed it aside as pre-presentation jitters. The executives filed in, a somber procession of gray hair and stern expressions. They settled into their high-backed leather chairs, their faces illuminated by the glow of their tablets. The room fell silent. Marcus stood and walked to the podium, his movements smooth and confident. He owned the space. He began with the usual pleasantries, his voice resonating with a practiced, reassuring authority. He painted a grim but realistic picture of the company's challenges, building the tension, making the executives feel the weight of the problem. Ilara felt her own analysis being mirrored back at her, a strange, out-of-body experience. He was setting the stage perfectly. But what if, Marcus boomed, his voice dropping dramatically, there was a way forward, a new path, hidden within the data we already possess? A path that required a new kind of vision to uncover. He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Ilara's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. For the past several months, Marcus continued, I have tasked one of our department's rising stars with finding that path. And the visionary behind this transformative new direction is with us today. Ilara instinctively straightened her posture, a small breath of anticipation escaping her lips. Marcus gestured broadly to his side. I'd like to introduce the architect of the Nexus project, Liam Hayes. The name hit Ilara with the force of a physical impact. For a split second, her brain refused to process it. It had to be a mistake, a slip of the tongue. But then she saw Liam stand up, giving the board a humble, confident nod before sitting back down. There was no mistake. The room remained silent, waiting. Marcus clicked the remote, and the first slide of the presentation appeared on the massive screen. It was her slide, her design, her words. And as Marcus began to speak, a slow, creeping horror began to dawn on Ilara. He wasn't just presenting her work. He was meticulously, systematically, and publicly reassigning its ownership. He moved through the presentation, each slide a fresh stab of betrayal. This initial insight, he would say, pointing to a chart Ilara had spent a week perfecting, was a brilliant piece of lateral thinking from Liam. He saw a connection no one else did. He navigated to the next slide. And based on that core concept, Liam then developed a three-pronged strategy to capitalize on this emerging market. He spoke of Liam's courage, Liam's innovation, Liam's leadership. He used words that Ilara had written in her initial prospectus and attributed them to Liam. He told the story of her late nights and her breakthrough moments as if they were Liam's. Ilara sat frozen, a statue in the front row. Her mind was screaming. That was me. I did that. That was my idea. But no sound came out. She felt a disorienting, dizzying sense of erasure, as if she were a ghost watching someone else live her life. She risked a glance at Liam. He was the picture of calm authority, staring intently at the screen, occasionally nodding in agreement with Marcus. He never once looked at her. He was an actor in the performance of his life, and he refused to acknowledge the playwright whose script he was reciting. Then came the final, most brutal blow. Marcus clicked to the last, most important slide, the elegant, powerful visual metaphor that distilled the entire complex strategy into a single, digestible image. The $1,000,000 slide. Liam's words echoed in her memory. The slide that Liam created here, Marcus said with a flourish, is, in my opinion, a work of genius. It tells the entire story without a single number. This is the kind of clear, top-level thinking that defines a true leader. The presentation ended. The executives, who had been listening with rapt attention, broke into a firm, decisive round of applause. The chairman of the board, a formidable man named Mr. Sterling, even spoke up. "Excellent work, Thorne. And to you, Mr. Hayes? Very impressive. You have a bright future here." As the meeting adjourned and the executives began to file out, Marcus finally, almost as an afterthought, acknowledged her existence. And of course, he announced to the room at large, this wouldn't have been possible without the tireless efforts of our support team. In particular, I want to thank Ilara Vance, whose diligent data gathering provided a crucial foundation for Liam's strategic work. He had done it. With one sentence, he had relegated her from architect to excavator, from visionary to a mere functionary who had dug up the raw materials for a better man to build with. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to stand. Liam had already been swept away by a group of VPs who were clapping him on the back. Ilara saw only Marcus, who was packing his leather briefcase with an air of immense satisfaction. She had to know why. She approached him, her voice a fragile whisper. "Marcus, the presentation. I don't understand." He turned to face her, and the warm, charming mask was gone. His eyes were cold, his expression one of weary impatience, as if he were dealing with a tiresome, emotional child. "What's not to understand, Ilara?" he said, his voice low and devoid of any warmth. He zipped his briefcase and looked at her directly. "Look, you're a fantastic worker bee. You're reliable, you're thorough. The engine room needs people like you. We all appreciate it." He paused, letting the insult land. "But you lack presence. You shrink in a room. You don't sell the story." Nexus needed a face, a confident voice. Liam has that spark. He commands respect. He straightened his tie, his gaze unwavering. "Some people are born to lead, Ilara. Others are born to support. You should be proud of the crucial support you provided today. Now, if you'll excuse me, we're taking Liam out for a celebratory lunch." He walked past her without another glance, leaving her standing alone in the center of the vast, silent boardroom, the echo of his words carving out a hollow space inside her where her ambition used to be. The walk back from the 50th floor was the longest journey of Ilara's life. The elevator's descent felt unnervingly slow. each floor it passed a measure of her fall from grace. When the doors opened onto the familiar 37th floor, the space she had once considered a second home now felt alien, hostile. The cheerful hum of productivity, the casual chatter between cubicles, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards, it all sounded like a language she no longer understood. She navigated the maze of desks, feeling the phantom weight of 100 unseen stares, though no one was paying her any attention. Her own cubicle, once a sanctuary of logic and control, now seemed like a glass-walled prison. She sank into her chair, the leather sighing under her weight. On her screens, the elegant architecture of the Nexus project still glowed. It was a monument to her own demolition. With a trembling hand, she moved the mouse and, one by one, closed every file, every spreadsheet, every presentation. It was an act of quiet surrender, of burying her own creation. The next morning, the silence began. It wasn't an absence of noise, but a new, suffocating presence. It started with Liam. Ilara had rehearsed 100 different confrontations in her head during a sleepless night, but when she saw him by the coffee machine, all she could manage was his name, a fragile question in the air. Liam? He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening in his shoulders, before turning around with a smile so bright it was blinding. It was a brand new smile, one she had never seen before, polished and impenetrable. Ilara. Morning, he chirped, his voice a full octave higher than usual. Sorry, can't talk, got a fire to put out with the new strategy team. You know Howard Island. He was already backing away as he spoke, grabbing his coffee and disappearing down the hall before she could utter another word. That became the pattern. Liam was always busy, always rushing to a meeting, always on a crucial call. He moved through the office with a newfound, frantic importance, a whirlwind of activity designed to keep him perpetually out of her reach. She would see him across the office, holding court with Marcus's inner circle, using the exact phrases and analogies she had taught him. He was performing her intellect, and the applause was deafening. Every time he laughed, every time he gestured confidently at a whiteboard, it felt like a personal, deliberate act of cruelty. He hadn't just stolen her work, he was now dancing on its grave. The betrayal, it turned out, was contagious. The verdict Marcus had passed down in the boardroom: she is a support player, not a leader, spread through the department like an invisible memo. Her colleagues, people she had worked alongside for years, began to treat her like a ghost. The change was subtle at first. The friendly good mornings became mumbled greetings. The invitations to grab a coffee stopped. The casual conversations that used to loop her in now fell silent the moment she approached, resuming only after she had passed. She was an interruption, a social awkwardness to be avoided. The exclusions soon became institutional. An email would circulate about a kickoff meeting for a new initiative, a project that fell directly within her area of expertise. Every analyst on the team was on the distribution list, except her. She would watch them file into a conference room, their laptops and notepads in hand, feeling a hot, helpless shame wash over her. She was being systematically carved out of her own career. In the few team meetings she was still required to attend, her voice was rendered useless. She would raise a valid point, backing it up with hard data, and Marcus would listen with a patient, indulgent smile before turning away. An interesting perspective, Ilara, thank you, he would say, the words a polite dismissal. Liam, what are your thoughts on the macro implications? He made it clear to everyone in the room. Ilara's contributions were quaint, academic footnotes. Liam's were the main text. Her knowledge was a resource to be mined, but her opinion was irrelevant. She was no longer a strategist, she was a human database, and one that was rapidly being decommissioned. The rituals of her day became rituals of loneliness. Lunchtime, once a cherished hour of escape and camaraderie with Liam, became the most painful part of her day. The first day, she went to the bustling company cafeteria and saw him at their usual table, surrounded by his new admirers, laughing at something one of them had said. The sight was so devastating she physically recoiled, turning around and walking out before anyone saw her. After that, she ate at her desk, the sad solitude of her pre-packaged sandwich, a testament to her new status as an outcast. She would stare at her screen, not reading a single word, while the office emptied out around her, the distant sounds of her colleagues' laughter, a form of torture. The silence of the office followed her home, filling her small apartment until it was hard to breathe. The professional betrayal was agonizing, but the personal one, from Liam, was what truly broke her. It replayed in her mind in an endless, torturous loop. Their shared jokes, their late-night work sessions, his declarations of friendship and loyalty. Had it all been a lie? A long, calculated con? The questions gnawed at her, eroding her confidence, her judgment, her sense of self. The anger she expected to feel was buried under a crushing mountain of self-doubt. Marcus's words had become the new narrator of her inner monologue. You lack presence. You're not a leader. You're a worker bee. She'd look in the mirror and see what he saw. Someone small, someone quiet, someone meant to support the success of others. The vibrant, fiercely intelligent woman who had conceived the Nexus project was gone, replaced by this hollow, defeated stranger. The office had become an echo chamber, but the most damaging echoes were the ones inside her own head, a constant, whispering chorus confirming her worthlessness. She wasn't just isolated, she was disappearing. The end, when it felt like it was coming, was not a dramatic explosion but a quiet, methodical surrender. It was a Friday night, weeks after the unveiling. The 37th floor was a ghost town, the rows of desks sitting in the eerie blue glow of hibernating computer monitors. Only one cubicle was still lit. Ilara sat bathed in the clinical white light of her screen, the blinking cursor in a blank document, a tiny rhythmic heartbeat counting down the last moments of her career at Sterling Cross. She was writing her resignation letter. Each word she typed was a small death, an admission of defeat. She wrote that she was leaving to pursue other opportunities, the bland, sterile lie that masked a world of pain. Pursue what? She felt hollowed out, her ambition and self-belief scoured away by weeks of relentless, silent humiliation. She had endured. She had come into work every day, sat at her desk, and pretended to be absorbed in the meaningless tasks Marcus now assigned her, running routine reports, cleaning up old data sets, work designed to keep her busy and invisible. She had become an expert at making herself small, at avoiding eye contact, at melting into the background. But the emptiness was consuming her. The daily sight of Liam, thriving in his stolen glory, was a poison she could no longer tolerate. To stay was to slowly go insane. To leave was to accept that Marcus was right. She chose the latter. It felt like the only choice left. With a final, weary sigh, she typed her name at the bottom of the letter and saved the file to her desktop, naming it simply Monday. She would print it, sign it, and slide it under Marcus's door before anyone else arrived. And then, she would be free. She leaned back in her chair, the soft leather creaking in the profound silence. This was it. She was about to shut everything down, to sever the final tie, when a jarring noise cut through the quiet. Her personal cell phone, lying screen down on her desk, began to vibrate. Its ringtone, a cheerful melody that sounded obscene in the funereal atmosphere. It was an unknown number, but something made her answer. She swiped the screen, her voice, a dry croak. "Hello?" A voice came through the line, a voice from another world, a world before all of this. It was calm, deep, and steady. A voice of absolute authority that always managed to sound like pure comfort. "Ilara. It's me." It was the man she knew as her father, though their relationship was more one of mentorship and distant, profound respect. He rarely called. "I was just thinking of you," he said gently. "How are you holding up?" His simple question shattered the dam she had so carefully constructed. A choked sob escaped her lips. The whole story came pouring out, a torrent of whispered pain and humiliation, of stolen work and a broken friendship. When she was finished, her voice raw, she delivered the final verdict. "So I'm quitting," she whispered into the phone. "I'm done. They won. Marcus was right about me all along." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, not of judgment, but of deep contemplation. She expected him to offer sympathy, to tell her she was making the right choice, to come home. He did none of those things. "Tell me, my dear," he began, his voice still perfectly level. "What is a building's greatest weakness?" The question was so strange, so out of place, that it momentarily silenced her tears. I don't know, she stammered. A weak beam? A crack in the wall? Its foundation, he replied, his voice firm. Everything rests upon it. And a house built on a foundation of lies cannot stand for long, no matter how beautiful or imposing it looks from the outside. The structure is fundamentally unsound. Elara listened, her brow furrowed in confusion. For weeks, he continued, you have been trying with all your might to hold up the ceiling, to prove you deserve a room in a house that is rotten to its core. You are exhausting yourself trying to fix a structure that is designed to collapse. So I will tell you to do something that will feel wrong. But you must trust me. Stop. Let go of the ceiling. Elara remained silent, captivated. Let them think you are beaten, he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense. Let them think you have accepted your fate. Sometimes, to truly see the cracks in a foundation, you must stop trying to patch them. You must stand very still, and you must watch. Observe everything. Learn how the rot spreads. Listen to the whispers. Follow the money. A defeated woman is invisible. Elara. And in a place like that, invisibility is a superpower. His words did not light a fire within her. They planted a seed of ice. It was a cold, hard, brilliant idea that took root in the barren soil of her despair. Quitting was an escape. Quitting was letting them get away with it. But staying not as a victim, but as a silent auditor, not as a worker bee, but as a spy, that was not defeat. That was a declaration of a different kind of war. A war fought not in boardrooms with presentations, but in the shadows with information. Her pain, the very thing that had been crushing her, could be her camouflage. Her isolation could be her greatest asset. No one pays attention to the broken. No one guards their secrets from the ghost in the corner cubicle. For the first time in weeks, a feeling other than despair began to stir within her. It was a feeling of purpose. Cold, clear, and sharp as a shard of glass. She took a deep breath, the air filling her lungs with something that felt like resolve. Okay, she said, her voice steady now. I understand. After she hung up the phone, she stared at the resignation letter on her screen. The words "pursue other opportunities" seemed pathetic, a coward's retreat. With a single, deliberate click of the mouse, she dragged the file named Monday into the trash bin icon on her desktop. The small, synthesized crunching sound was the most satisfying thing she had heard in a month. It was the sound of a new beginning. She went home that night and, for the first time since the betrayal, she slept a deep and dreamless sleep. When she walked into the office on Monday morning, nothing about her outward appearance had changed. She wore the same simple, professional clothes. Her expression was the same neutral, quiet mask. But behind her eyes, a revolution had begun. As Liam swaggered past her desk, laughing on his phone without giving her a second glance, she didn't feel the familiar sting of hurt. Instead, she watched him, her gaze analytical and unnervingly calm. She was no longer a ghost haunting her old life. She was a hunter, and she had just learned the most important lesson of all. To catch her prey, she first had to learn to be invisible. The transformation of Elara Vance was an exercise in masterful subtlety. To the casual observer, she was a case study in corporate defeat. She arrived at her desk at precisely 9 a.m. and left at 5 p.m. on the dot. The fire of her former ambition, which had once kept her working late into the night, had seemingly been extinguished. She performed the menial tasks assigned to her with a quiet, uncomplaining diligence. She was a model of compliance. Her demeanor was meek, her eyes perpetually downcast. She was a ghost in the machine, a non-entity, and that was precisely what she wanted. Her performance was so convincing that it even earned her the occasional, pitying glance from Marcus. One afternoon, he stopped by her cubicle, a look of magnanimous concern on his face. "Just checking in, Elara," he said, his voice laced with false sincerity. "How are you holding up?" She looked up from her screen, making sure her eyes looked tired, defeated. "I'm okay, Marcus. Just taking it one day at a time." "Good," he said, patting her cubicle wall. "That's the spirit." He saw a broken cog, still turning but no longer a threat to his machine. He and Liam had become careless around her, discussing sensitive details of their new projects in her earshot, confident that she was too beaten down to understand or care. Their arrogance was her shield. But when the last employee had departed and the office sank into a deep, humming silence, a different Alara emerged. The defeated mask would fall away, replaced by an expression of intense, focused concentration. The night was her domain. The empty office was not a place of loneliness, but her private laboratory, and her first subject for dissection was the one she knew best, the bloated, triumphant budget of the Nexus project. She wasn't an employee anymore. She was an archaeologist, and she knew exactly where the bones were buried. For the first few nights, she simply reread her own work, cross-referencing her initial projections with the final expense reports. She knew every line item, every projected cost down to the last cent. And that's when she found it. It wasn't a glaring error. It was smaller, subtler, a loose thread in a perfectly woven tapestry. It was an invoice from a third-party vendor she had never heard of. Innovatec Strategic Solutions. The invoice was for $15,000 for a line item described as Synergistic Outreach Consulting. It was dated for the final week of the project. Ilara's blood ran cold. There had been no Synergistic Outreach Consulting. She herself had personally handled every single stakeholder briefing and internal communication. This was a phantom service. She pulled up the scanned document. The invoice itself looked cheap, the logo slightly pixelated, as if it had been designed in a hurry. The approval stamp at the bottom was clear. A confident, flowing signature from Marcus, co-signed with a slightly less certain scribble from Liam. This was it. The first tangible piece of a puzzle she didn't yet understand. Alara's mind, once used to build corporate strategies, now refocused on deconstruction. Her analytical skills became forensic tools. The investigation began. First, Innovatec Strategic Solutions. A public records search on a corporate database took less than 5 minutes. The company was an LLC, registered just 6 months prior in Delaware, a state notorious for its corporate secrecy. The registered agent was a generic legal service, and the official address was a UPS store mailbox in a suburban strip mall. Its website, which she found after some digging, was a masterpiece of corporate nothingness, filled with stock photos of smiling, diverse business people, and vague promises of leveraging paradigms and optimizing integration. It was a ghost company, a shell. Next, she turned her attention back to the Sterling Cross servers. The $15,000 payment was a thread. Now she had to see what it was attached to. She couldn't risk a broad, noisy search that might be flagged by IT. Instead, she used her deep knowledge of the company's arcane filing system, running a series of quiet, targeted queries in the late hours of the night. She searched for the vendor name, for the bank account number the payment was wired to, for invoice numbers that were numerically close to the one she had found. It was like fishing in the dark, but Alara was patient. On the third night of searching, she got a hit, then another. 2 more payments to Innovatec, from 2 different, smaller projects that Liam was now leading. One for $20,000, another for $12,000. All for vaguely defined consulting services, all personally approved by Marcus and Liam. In less than 3 months, nearly $50,000 had been funneled into a company that, for all intents and purposes, didn't exist. She knew she was onto something significant, but she needed to understand the mechanics. How were they pushing these payments through without raising alarms? The digital trail could only tell her so much. She needed the human element. This was where her new persona became her greatest weapon. The next day, she approached a junior-level clerk in the accounts payable department, a young man named Kevin who was often overwhelmed by his workload. She affected a look of complete, helpless confusion, holding a printout of a legitimate, unrelated expense report. "Kevin, I'm so sorry to bother you," she began, her voice soft and timid. "Marcus has me reconciling some of these old budgets, and my brain is just scrambled. I don't suppose you could walk me through how a new vendor gets set up in the system? I feel so stupid asking." Kevin, eager for a distraction and seeing Alara as the office ghost harmless and slightly pathetic, was more than happy to help. "Oh, sure, Laura. No problem," he said cheerfully. He showed her the digital portal, the forms, the approval chain, and then he gave her the key. It's pretty straightforward, unless it's a huge contract. Anything under $25,000 doesn't need to go to the divisional CFO. As long as the department head signs off on it, he explained, unknowingly tracing the exact path of the Innovatech payments, it pretty much gets processed automatically. He had just handed her the blueprint for their entire scheme. They were keeping the individual payments small enough to stay within Marcus's discretionary budget, flying right under the radar of higher corporate oversight. That night, Alara sat at her desk, the sprawling city lights outside her window a silent witness to her work. She had a new spreadsheet open on her screen, one that would never be saved on a company server. It was a matrix of deceit. The columns were labeled date, project name, invoice number, amount, approver. The rows were beginning to fill up. She mapped the flow of money from Sterling Cross into the black hole of Innovatech Solutions. It was no longer a suspicion, it was a pattern, a clear, undeniable trail of embezzlement and fraud. The silent auditor had completed her first official review, and the findings were a declaration of war. She still didn't have the whole picture who was behind Innovatech, where the money ultimately ended up, but she had the proof of the rot in the foundation. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. The digital breadcrumbs led Alara to a locked door. She had a list of fraudulent payments, a ghost company, and a clear pattern of embezzlement. But she had reached the boundary of her authority. The deepest, most damning secrets of a corporation are not kept in strategy documents. They are buried in the transaction logs and audit trails of the accounting department, a digital fortress to which she had no key. The wiring instructions for the Innovatech payments, the internal fund transfer authorizations, the IP addresses of the digital signatures, all of it was hidden behind a firewall that only a senior accountant could breach. To go further, she couldn't just be a silent auditor. She needed an accomplice, and not just anyone. She needed someone with unimpeachable integrity, deep institutional knowledge, and, most importantly, someone who had no love for Marcus Thorne. There was only one person in the entire company who fit that description: Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was the head of the General Ledger accounting team, a title she had held for nearly 2 decades. She was a fixture at Sterling Cross, a woman who seemed to be carved from the same granite as the building's foundation. She was in her early 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a no-nonsense demeanor that terrified junior employees. Her office was an island of analog order in a digital sea. While executives chased the latest management fads, Sarah still trusted her well-worn 10-key calculator and the meticulous, color-coded binders that lined her shelves. She was the company's memory, a living archive of every financial decision, good and bad, made over the last 30 years. And she was precisely the kind of person Marcus despised. He saw her adherence to process not as diligence, but as a roadblock to his agile ambitions. Alara had witnessed his condescension firsthand in meetings, where he would wave away Sarah's concerns about budgetary controls with a dismissive, "Sarah, we're building a jet plane here. You can't worry about the cost of the rivets." He treated her like a relic. Alara was betting that the relic had a sharp edge. Approaching her was a tremendous risk. If Sarah refused and reported her, Alara's career wouldn't just be over. She could face legal action for unauthorized use of company systems. She had to choose her moment perfectly. She waited until a Wednesday evening, long after the ambitious and the sociable had gone home. Sarah, a creature of habit, always stayed until 7 p.m. to close out the day's books. Alara walked down the silent, darkened corridor to the accounting department. The only light on was a warm yellow glow spilling from Sarah's doorway. Alara knocked softly on the doorframe. Sarah looked up from a sprawling ledger, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Her expression was not welcoming. It was the weary, suspicious look of a woman who has seen it all and expects the worst. "Vance," she said, her voice clipped. "What do you want?" "It's past 7. Alara's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady, sticking to the cover story she had rehearsed. "I'm sorry to bother you, Sarah. Marcus has me on a budget reconciliation project." For Nexus. I found an invoice I can't make sense of, and Kevin in AP said you were the only one who could clarify. She slid the Innovatic invoice onto Sarah's pristine desk blotter. Sarah picked it up with a sigh of annoyance, her eyes scanning the document. Alara watched as the accountant's gaze sharpened. Her 30 years of experience saw all the same red flags Alara had. The generic service description, the P.O. box address, the low invoice number. A flicker of something interest, suspicion crossed Sarah's face before it was replaced by a mask of stern indifference. She placed the paper back on the desk and pushed it toward Alara. "Listen to me, girl," Sarah said, her voice low and firm. "I've been in this company since before you were born. I have watched arrogant, empty suits like Marcus Thorne climb their way to the top on the backs of good people, and I've watched them fall. You don't fight them. It's a messy, losing battle. You keep your head down, you do your job, and you outlast them." She took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "My pension vests in 18 months. I have no interest in getting into a political knife fight with a man who has the CEO's ear. Whatever this is," she tapped the invoice, "it's a hornet's nest. My advice to you is to drop it, walk away, and forget you ever saw it. Don't be a fool." The rejection was absolute. A steel door slammed in Alara's face. But Alara had anticipated this. She knew that an appeal to justice or revenge would fail. She had to appeal to the one thing Sarah valued above all else: order, the integrity of the numbers. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply reached into her folder and pulled out a second piece of paper, placing it next to the invoice. It wasn't another invoice. It was a printout of the wire transfer confirmation for the payment. "I understand completely, Sarah, and I will walk away if you tell me to," Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I just wanted you to see this. The routing number for Innovatic's bank. Does it look familiar to you?" Sarah put her glasses back on and leaned in. She stared at the 9-digit number. Her eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. A sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. She looked from the paper to Alara, and for the first time, she saw not a naive girl, but a serious player. "That number," Sarah breathed, her voice tight with disbelief. "It's the same clearinghouse used by Vantage Corp, the shell company from the Braxton fraud case. The one I helped internal audit shut down 5 years ago. The sloppiness, the sheer audacity of it was an insult to her profession. Marcus and Liam weren't just thieves. They were lazy, arrogant thieves. They had reused a playbook that a professional like Sarah had already defeated once." Alara pressed her advantage, her voice remaining quiet and factual. "There are 2 other payments, almost $50,000 in 3 months. All of them went to that same account. All of them stayed under the $25,000 threshold for CFO oversight." She didn't need to say anything else. She had presented an equation that Sarah's mind was uniquely equipped to solve. This was no longer a political problem. This was a cancer in her ledgers. It was an intolerable breach of the systems she had dedicated her life to protecting. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the leather groaning in protest. She stared at the ceiling for a long, silent minute, her mind weighing 32 years of quiet survival against a final, righteous act of war. The integrity of her life's work won. She lowered her gaze and met Alara's eyes. The weariness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fire. "All right," she said, her voice a low growl. "But we do this my way. No mistakes, no emails. No one can ever know about this. We will gather every single piece of evidence, every transaction, every approval, every lie. We will build a case so airtight, so undeniable, that when we present it, they won't be able to run, and they won't be able to hide." She extended a hand across the desk. "We will burn them to the ground." Alara took her hand. The grip was firm, resolute. An unlikely alliance was forged in the silence of the empty office, a secret 2-woman army preparing to march. Success, especially when unearned, is a powerful intoxicant. For Marcus Thorne and Liam Hayes, it was a license to indulge in the kind of brazen arrogance they had always craved. The ghost of Alara Vance, now a permanent fixture of quiet compliance in the corner, was the perfect symbol of their victory. They saw her every day and saw nothing at all, which made them feel powerful and, more dangerously, invincible. Their hubris began to manifest in tells. Liam, once a man of modest means, started wearing a Swiss watch that cost more than Alara's monthly salary. He spoke loudly of joining an exclusive golf club and dropped the names of executives he was now supposedly mentoring. Marcus, for his part, became even more dismissive and expansive. He took personal calls in the open-plan office, his voice booming as he discussed quotes for a Tuscan-inspired renovation of his home kitchen that sounded suspiciously like a complete rebuilding of his mansion's east wing. They were no longer just committing a crime, they were reveling in its spoils, confident that the system was too complex and the people in it too blind to ever catch them. While they preened in the spotlight, a silent, deadly partnership was solidifying in the shadows. Ilara and Sarah operated with the quiet precision of a special operations unit. They never spoke of their investigation within the walls of Stirling Cross. Their meetings took place in the anonymous corners of the city, a bench in a windswept public park, a quiet table in the back of a university library, the passenger seat of Sarah's unassuming sedan in a grocery store parking lot. The exchanges were brief and purposeful. Sarah, the master of the inside game, would pass Ilara a plain manila envelope. Inside were printouts, documents a mere analyst should never be able to see, internal audit logs, server access records, unredacted transaction reports. Ilara, the master of data, would hand back a small encrypted flash drive containing her analysis of the last drop, along with a new set of targeted questions. During one such exchange, Sarah delivered a critical piece of the puzzle. "The digital approvals for the Innovatech payments," she said, her voice a low murmur that was barely audible over the hum of the library's ventilation system. "I checked the root server logs. The IP address was masked, routed through a VPN in Panama. A dead end." Alara's face fell, but Sarah held up a hand. "But the user credentials that initiated the VPN session, the ones that logged in just moments before the approvals were time-stamped, they weren't Marcus's, they were Liam's." The discovery landed with a heavy thud. Liam wasn't just a puppet, a charming face for Marcus's scheme. He was an active, willing conspirator, the one pushing the buttons. He was just as guilty. Emboldened by their easy money and the continued praise from senior leadership, Marcus and Liam decided to escalate. Their small-time embezzlement scheme was about to go corporate. Marcus called a department-wide meeting to announce a bold new strategic partnership. He spoke with evangelical fervor about a dynamic, cutting-edge consulting firm called Vanguard Solutions that would be brought in to optimize interdepartmental workflow and synergize core competencies. The jargon was a dense fog designed to obscure the truth. The contract was for $250,000. It was structured as a 12-month retainer, with monthly payments of just over $20,000, a figure craftily designed to stay below the threshold that would trigger an automatic, high-level CFO review. To his team, Marcus presented it as another brilliant move, a testament to the department's forward-thinking vision under his and Liam's leadership. To Ilara and Sarah, the announcement was a blaring alarm. The name Vanguard Solutions immediately went to the top of their target list. Ilara's initial open-source search revealed the familiar, nauseating pattern of a shell company, recently incorporated, a vague website, a registered address that was little more than a mailbox. But this time, they needed more than just circumstantial evidence. They needed a direct, undeniable link. They needed a smoking gun. This was where Sarah's 32 years of institutional knowledge became their ultimate weapon. Sarah knew that despite the company's move to digital systems, a physical paper trail was still legally required for all new vendor contracts. Deep in the sub-basement of the Stirling Cross building was an archive room, a dusty, climate-controlled crypt where the company's paper history was laid to rest. One evening, armed with a visitor's access key she shouldn't have had, Sarah descended into the silent, forgotten archive. The room smelled of old paper and decaying glue. She navigated the rolling stacks of shelves until she found the vendor files for the current fiscal year. And there it was, a thin, pristine folder labeled Vanguard Solutions. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was the contract, signed by Marcus. And clipped to it, as required by corporate bylaws, was a copy of the company's Articles of Incorporation. Sarah scanned the document, her eyes landing on the name of the sole proprietor and registered signatory. The name was not one she recognized. It was David Miller. To Alara, the name would have been a dead end. But Sarah was the company's memory. The name sparked a faint connection, a ghost of a memory from years past. She returned to her office, her mind racing. She bypassed the accounting servers. This time, she logged into the Human Resources portal, using her department head credentials to access a file she had no business looking at, Marcus Thorne's employee profile. She scrolled past his salary, his performance reviews, his stock options. She was looking for his benefits information, specifically his life insurance and emergency contacts, and there it was. His listed beneficiary was his wife, Catherine Thorne, and right next to it, in parentheses, was her maiden name, Miller. As a final confirmation, Sarah checked Catherine's listed emergency contact, her brother. The name on the screen made Sarah's blood run cold. David Miller. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening finality. Vanguard Solutions was Marcus's brother-in-law. This wasn't just a sophisticated embezzlement scheme anymore. This was a grubby, blatant act of nepotism and criminal conspiracy. He was signing company checks and handing the money directly to his own family. Their next meeting took place in Sarah's car, parked in the far corner of a dimly lit supermarket parking lot. The rain drummed a soft rhythm on the roof. Sarah didn't say a word. She simply laid 3 documents on the passenger seat for Alara to see. The first was the Vanguard Solutions contract with Marcus's signature. The second was the Articles of Incorporation with David Miller's signature. The third was the printout from the HR database, a simple line of text connecting Catherine Thorne nee Miller to her brother David. Alara stared at the documents, the simple, undeniable proof of the entire conspiracy. The house of cards wasn't just teetering anymore. They were holding the 2 cards that connected the entire fraudulent structure, the king and his jack. A grim, cold sense of satisfaction settled over her. All that remained was to decide when and how to bring the whole thing crashing down. With the final piece of the puzzle in hand, the nature of the work changed. The phase of discovery was over. The phase of prosecution had begun. Alara and Sarah were no longer just investigators. They were architects, building an indestructible case against Marcus Thorne and Liam Hayes. Their secret meetings shifted from exchanges of raw intelligence to sessions of intense, meticulous curation. They were assembling the weapon that would bring the entire corrupt structure down. They called it, simply, the dossier. It was Alara's masterpiece, the culmination of her pain, her intellect, and her unyielding resolve. Working late into the night at her small apartment, far from the prying eyes of the Sterling Cross servers, she began to weave the disparate threads of evidence into a single, damning narrative. This was not just a collection of documents, it was a story, crafted with the same precision she had once used for the Nexus project. The dossier was bound in a simple, professional black cover, its contents organized into tabbed sections, each one a nail in the coffin. The first page was a 1-page executive summary, a marvel of brutal efficiency. It laid out the entire conspiracy in cold, hard facts. The names, the dates, the shell companies, the total amount stolen now calculated to be well over $300,000, and the direct family connection that proved intent. It was designed to be read in 60 seconds and to be unforgettable. Following the summary were the sections of evidence. Innovatech Strategic Solutions contained the fraudulent invoices, the wire transfer confirmations, and Alara's analysis of the shell company's non-existence. Vanguard Solutions was thicker, containing the $250,000 contract, the Articles of Incorporation signed by David Miller, and the damning printout from the HR database showing Marcus Thorne's family ties. A third section, titled The Co-Conspirator, focused solely on Liam. It included the server logs Sarah had unearthed, proving Liam's credentials were used to approve the payments, and, in a stroke of genius, Alara had included copies of Liam's own gushing emails, praising her for the very Nexus project ideas he would later claim as his own. She even added a final, devastating chart. Using public data and company reports, she created a timeline. One line showed the department's official bonus pool, which had been mysteriously shrinking for the past 2 years due to budgetary constraints. The other line, running parallel to it, showed the escalating payments to the shell companies. The visual story was undeniable. Marcus and Liam weren't just stealing from the company, they were stealing directly from the pockets of their own team. With the dossier complete, a thick, heavy volume of irrefutable truth, the final question remained: how to deploy it. This led to their one and only major disagreement. They met for the last time in the echoing silence of a closed city market at dawn. Sarah, ever the institutionalist, argued for the proper channels. "We take this to the chief compliance officer," she insisted, her voice a tense whisper. "Or the head of internal audit. It's the procedure. It's clean. It protects us." Alara shook her head, her expression grim. She had seen the system up close, and she knew it was a club designed to protect its own. "The procedure is Marcus's home field, Sarah," she countered, her voice low but firm. "He plays golf with the head of audit. His wife is on a charity committee with the general counsel's wife. They are all part of the same ecosystem. The moment we hand this over, it gets contained. There will be a quiet, internal investigation. Marcus will be allowed to resign for personal reasons. Liam will get a slap on the wrist. The company will bury it to avoid a scandal, and you and I will be labeled as disgruntled troublemakers and quietly managed out within a year. The system isn't designed to find the truth, Sarah. It's designed to protect itself." Sarah looked defeated. "Then what do we do? Walk into the CEO's office?" "No," Ilara said, a new dangerous light in her eyes. "Not his office. We go to a place where even the CEO is just another employee. We don't go to his managers. We go to his owners." She pulled out her phone and showed Sarah the corporate calendar. She pointed to a date just 1 week away. It was the annual shareholder meeting. "It's the one day a year," Ilara explained, "when the entire board of directors, the major institutional investors, and the executive leadership are all together in one room. It's a public forum. It is the company's high court, and it is in session for exactly 3 hours. There are no backroom deals there, no quiet resignations. There is only public accountability." The audacity of the plan took Sarah's breath away. It was an all-or-nothing, high-wire act with no safety net. It was either total victory or career suicide. She looked at Alara, at the quiet, underestimated analyst who had been so thoroughly broken, and saw a brilliant, ruthless strategist. She saw a woman who had learned that when the rules of the game are rigged, you don't just play better. You flip the entire table over. Sarah gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right," she said. The High Court at Island. The final week was a blur of tense, clandestine preparation. At a 24-hour copy shop miles from her home, Ilara printed and bound 5 identical copies of the dossier. Sarah, using a disconnected, ancient printer in her basement, did the same with 5 more. They were building redundancy, ensuring there was no single point of failure. Alara created a master digital version, encrypted it with a key only she and Sarah possessed, and uploaded it to a secure, anonymous cloud server, a dead man's switch, an insurance policy in case they were discovered before the meeting. They spoke only through encrypted messaging apps, their communications short and precise. They were 2 soldiers in the final hours before a planned invasion, their fear eclipsed only by their resolve. On the eve of the meeting, Alara sat alone in her apartment. One of the bound copies of the dossier lay on her coffee table. It felt impossibly heavy, a dense, physical object made of secrets and lies. She picked it up, its weight a comforting reassurance of the truth she was about to unleash. She caught her reflection in the dark glass of her apartment window, the city lights twinkling behind her like a distant, unconcerned galaxy. The woman staring back at her was not the same person who had written a letter of resignation in a dark, empty office. The victim was gone. In her place was a strategist, an executioner. The plan was set. The weapons were prepared. The board was arranged for the final move. Tomorrow, in front of the world, she would say, "Checkmate." The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel was a cathedral of corporate power. Hundreds of shareholders, analysts, and executives sat in neat, orderly rows, a sea of dark suits and quiet ambition. On the raised dais at the front of the room sat the gods of Sterling Cross, the CEO, the board of directors, and at their center, the chairman, Mr. Harrison Sterling. He was a man in his late 70s, with a reputation forged in the brutal takeover battles of the 1,980 seconds. His presence commanded a kind of fearful reverence. He was known for his sharp intellect and a complete, almost surgical, intolerance for incompetence and deceit. In the front row, Marcus Thorne and Liam Hayes sat like princes awaiting their coronation, basking in the reflected glory of the main stage. And in the very back of the room, near an exit, sat Sarah Jenkins, a quiet, gray-haired woman who looked like just another anonymous employee. But her role today was not that of an observer. She was a witness. The meeting droned on with its predictable rhythm. The CEO delivered a soaring speech filled with optimistic projections. The CFO presented a labyrinth of financial charts. Then, the agenda shifted to departmental highlights. The CEO smiled broadly. And now, to speak about the incredible strategic turnaround and the future of our growth engine, I'd like to invite up the head of our strategy department, Mr. Marcus Thorne. A polite ripple of applause went through the room. Marcus stood, smoothed his tie, and gave Liam a confident nod. He took his first step towards the stage, his moment of ultimate triumph just seconds away. And then it happened. An interruption. From a side door, a young, unassuming executive assistant walked onto the floor. She moved with a calm, unhurried purpose that seemed to bend the room's attention toward her. She ignored the CEO's questioning gaze and walked directly to the main table on the dais. She bypassed everyone, stopping only when she stood beside the chairman himself. She leaned in and placed the single, black-bound dossier directly in front of Mr. Sterling. Her voice, though a whisper, was picked up by the chairman's live microphone, a soft but clear statement that sliced through the ballroom's quiet hum. "Mr. Chairman," she said, just as Alara had coached her, "my apologies for the interruption. This is a time-sensitive matter regarding fiduciary duty to the shareholders, delivered on behalf of concerned employees." With that, she turned and walked away, melting back into the anonymity from which she came. A stunned silence fell over the room. Marcus was frozen mid-stride, a statue of thwarted ambition. The CEO looked furious at the breach of protocol. Mr. Sterling glared at the dossier on his table as if it were a venomous snake. With a sigh of profound irritation, he opened it. He intended to dismiss it after a cursory glance, but he didn't. His eyes fell upon the executive summary, that single, devastating page that Alara had crafted with such precision. The attendees watched as a stunning transformation occurred on the chairman's face. His irritation dissolved, replaced by a flicker of disbelief, which then hardened into a look of such cold, concentrated fury that several board members visibly shifted in their seats. His knuckles, gripping the edge of the dossier, were bone white. He read the page once, then a second time, his jaw tightening. He slowly raised his head, his gaze sweeping across the front rows until it found Marcus Thorne and locked onto him with the intensity of a laser. Ignoring the CEO, ignoring the agenda, Mr. Sterling leaned into his microphone. His voice was no longer the steady tone of a corporate leader. It was the sound of cracking ice. "We will be taking a brief 15-minute recess," he announced. The abrupt declaration sent a wave of confused murmurs through the audience. He then turned to his personal aide and issued a series of quiet, staccato commands that were a death sentence. "Get Harrison, our general counsel. Get Reynolds, the head of internal audit. Get them in the anteroom, now, and have hotel security seal this ballroom. No one leaves." The 15 minutes that followed were the most excruciatingly tense moments in the history of Sterling Cross. Marcus and Liam returned to their seats, whispering frantically to each other, their faces pale with a confusion that was rapidly souring into dread. The company's top lawyers and auditors appeared, looking grim and harried, and were ushered into a side room. Finally, the doors to the anteroom opened, and Mr. Sterling returned to the dais, his face a granite mask of judgment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now resume," he said into the microphone. "Mr. Thorne, Mr. Hayes." I believe you are on your way to the podium. Please, join me." They walked to the stage, no longer as conquering heroes, but as prisoners walking the last mile. The room was utterly silent. Mr. Sterling did not stand. He sat, holding the open dossier. He looked at the two men standing before him. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice dangerously soft, "this report alleges certain financial irregularities originating from your department. Perhaps you can enlighten the board on the nature of your $100,000 consulting contract with a firm called Innovatech Strategic Solutions?" Marcus began to stammer, a flush creeping up his neck. "Well, Mr. Chairman, they were a key partner in our outreach. And Mr. Hayes," the chairman continued, cutting him off, "can you explain why the digital authorizations for these payments originated from a masked IP address using your personal login credentials?" Liam went white as a sheet, looking as though he might faint. I don't recall." The chairman's voice grew colder. "And finally, Mr. Thorne, a simple question. What is your relationship, both professional and personal, with a Mr. David Miller, the registered owner of Vanguard Solutions, to whom this company recently awarded a $250,000 contract at your sole recommendation?" Marcus's face crumpled. It was over. He knew it. The connection was undeniable. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Mr. Sterling slammed the dossier shut. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. His final judgment was delivered without a shred of emotion. "Effective immediately," he announced, his voice booming through the sound system. "The employment of Marcus Thorne and Liam Hayes with this corporation is terminated for cause, pending a full criminal investigation, which will be turned over to the district attorney's office." As he spoke the words, two uniformed security guards, who had entered the room unnoticed during the recess, stepped forward. They flanked Marcus and Liam. "You will be escorted from the premises immediately," the chairman concluded. "Do not return to your desks. Do not speak to anyone. You are done." The public execution was complete. In front of their peers, their leaders, and the company's owners, Marcus and Liam were marched off the stage and through the stunned crowd. Marcus was red-faced, sputtering in disbelief. Liam was a ghost, his eyes vacant. In the back of the room, Sarah Jenkins watched them pass, her expression unreadable. She then stood up, turned, and walked quietly out of the door. The judgment had been served. The house of cards was nothing but ash. News of the public execution in the grand ballroom spread through Stirling Cross like a shockwave. The 37th floor became a vortex of whispers and wild speculation. The empty desks of Marcus Thorne and Liam Hayes were stark, silent monuments to the sudden, brutal shift in power. Security had packed their personal effects into cardboard boxes with a cold, impersonal efficiency, erasing them from the corporate landscape as if they had never existed. The rest of the team walked on eggshells, their faces a mixture of fear, morbid curiosity, and a secret, shameful relief. They huddled in small groups by the coffee machine, trying to piece together the story, never once glancing at the quiet analyst in the corner who was the architect of it all. Ilara remained at her desk, a bastion of calm in the chaos she had unleashed. They still saw her as the office ghost, the irrelevant worker bee, a footnote in a drama that had been about bigger, more important men. They had no idea they were looking at the queen who had just toppled the entire board. A few days later, an email from the CEO's office summoned the entire strategy department to the main conference room. The mood was tense, funereal. The team filed in, taking their seats at the long, polished table where Ilara's fate had once been so cruelly decided. She, by force of habit, took a seat in the back, an observer to the end. The CEO, a man named Caldwell, who looked as though he hadn't slept in days, entered and stood at the head of the table. He gave a brief, weary speech about the importance of integrity, the company's zero-tolerance policy for misconduct, and the need to move forward. "To that end," he said, his eyes scanning the anxious faces, "I have made a decision regarding the department's new leadership. To ensure stability and guide us through this critical transition, I have appointed an interim head of strategy, effective immediately." He took a breath. That person is Ilara Vance. A profound, collective silence fell upon the room. It was not a silence of respect, but of pure, unadulterated shock. A dozen heads whipped around to stare at Alara in the back of the room, their expressions a comical blend of disbelief and confusion. It made no sense. They were witnessing a janitor being handed the keys to the kingdom. Alara met their stunned gazes, her expression perfectly neutral. She stood, walked calmly to the front of the room, and took her place beside the CEO. The whispers started then, a rising tide of questions and incredulity. But just as the noise began to swell, the conference room door opened again. Harrison Sterling, the chairman of the board, walked in. If the CEO's presence had commanded attention, the chairman's presence commanded absolute submission. A hush fell over the room so complete that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like a roar. He walked to the front of the room and stood on the other side of Alara, his posture erect, his gaze sweeping over the department with an unreadable intensity. The message was clear. This was not a normal departmental meeting. This was an enthronement. "Good morning," the chairman began, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute power. "Mr. Caldwell has made his announcement, and I can see that it has come as a surprise to many of you." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Allow me to provide some context. Alara has more than earned this position. She has earned it through her exceptional work, through her unwavering integrity in the face of corruption, and through a degree of courage that, frankly, I have not witnessed in this company for a very long time." He then looked at the faces of the team, the same people who had shunned her, ignored her, and dismissed her. "But there is something else you should know. A reason why the events of the last few months have been a matter of personal significance to me." He took a half step closer to Alara, a gesture that was both protective and proprietary. "Several years ago, I asked my niece if she would be willing to undertake a challenge. I asked her to learn this business not from the top down, but from the bottom up. I wanted her to join this company as an employee, judged not by her family name, but by the quality of her character and her work." He let that sink in, watching the dawning horror on the faces before him. "I wanted her to understand the heart of this company, its people. I wanted her to do so without the burden or the privilege of her last name." He then placed a hand gently on Alara's shoulder, a final, definitive act of revelation. "Her mother was my beloved sister. Her full name is Alara Vance Sterling, and it seems my niece has learned more about the heart of this company, both its finest qualities and its deepest rot, than I could have ever anticipated." The final shock was absolute. Every slight, every whispered joke, every ignored suggestion, every lonely lunch was instantly and horrifically recontextualized. They hadn't just bullied a quiet colleague. They had ostracized the chairman's chosen heir. The wise, disembodied voice on the phone who had counseled patience and observation was not some distant father. It was the man who owned their world. Marcus and Liam hadn't just betrayed an analyst. They had committed career suicide by trying to defraud the chairman's own blood. Alara Vance Sterling stood before them, no longer a ghost, but the embodiment of a justice so complete, so poetic, that it was terrifying. And so we learn the final lesson from the silent theaters of the corporate world. Never underestimate the quiet ones, the ones who watch, who listen, who absorb. For when a person who has endured too much finally decides to act, their silence is replaced by a storm. True power is not the voice that shouts the loudest in the meeting room, but the mind that sees the truth in the numbers, the heart that holds to its integrity when others falter, and the will that meticulously plans its victory while everyone else is celebrating a stolen prize. In the end, Marcus and Liam were not brought down by an army, but by a single, brilliant mind they had been too arrogant to see. The corporate world is full of stories like Alara's, each with its own betrayals and its own brand of justice. Join us next time as we uncover another tale hidden behind the glass walls of ambition.